Great. Sorry, it's a little bit dark in here. I changed a light bulb on my desk lamp, and I realized it looks a little cartoon villainy in here. I'm not sure how to fix that. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here to, I don't even know what number this is, but to our Parent Up program. Tonight's topic is My Child Just Came Out, to really help parents navigate that season in life. And so we're really grateful first and foremost to NAMI, who is our signature sponsor of our Parent Up programs. But we're very grateful to have Dr. Johanna Burnett to be as one of our guests. Dr. Burnett holds a bachelor's degree in biology from Chatham University and a PhD in solid state chemistry from Duquesne University. She is the speaker's chair for PFLAG Pittsburgh and sits on the board of both Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh Gender Clinics Community Advisory Board and the Gender Research Stakeholders Project. As founder of Parent to Parent, a support group for parents of gender diverse children, she also provides regular educational programs and special events in order to help destigmatize the transgender community and promote awareness and acceptance. So we are thrilled to have you here, Dr. Burnett. I'll let you introduce your panel.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I am so pleased that we have a fantastic panel this evening. We do have one latecomer. There is our latecomer. Talia, is it okay that we are being recorded? You weren't here beforehand. I just wanted to make sure you're okay with that. This will be available for other parents within their organization to view at a later date that couldn't make it this evening. Are you okay with that? Yes, you, Talia. Okay, awesome, fantastic. So I am, I'll give a brief intro of each of our panelists, and then they can talk a little bit more about themselves and share a little more of their story as I wrap up my brief presentation. But this evening we have another parent, Dave West, and Dave is actually the president of PFLAG, and he is also on all of the other boards that I'm on, so not to repeat all of that. And Marshall is with us this evening too. Marshall's pronouns are he, they, and they, and I forgot to say Dave's pronouns are he, him, and his. And Marshall is invited to the boards, the aforementioned boards, and has spoken at a couple different events. And Talia is a new speaker with us and has just volunteered at PFLAG. So I'm very excited, and they can tell a little bit more about their stories. And I'm going to share my screen. We tested this out. Hopefully it still works well. Hopefully everybody can see that. So let's see.
I can see it.
Awesome. Yep. So I see if I can go back to this side. I am so you contacted us through PFLAG for this event, and PFLAG stands for Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, and that has expanded greatly over the decades, obviously, to include transgender, queer, non-binary, just the entire umbrella. I really encourage you to check out our website to really get a feel for everything that PFLAG does, and maybe Dave will share, since Dave's here, maybe Dave will share a little bit more on that. So
now sure. Sorry. First of all, I want to clarify, I am not president of PFLAG. I would not want that job. PFLAG is a national organization. I'm president of the Pittsburgh chapter of PFLAG. I do not want that promotion at all. And also our national institution has asked that we emphasize to people that, and Johanna, you did not know this. This is not a correction as much as some piece of information. We have done away with the acronym because it is outdated. We are just simply PFLAG. It does not mean anything anymore. Well, it doesn't stand for anything anymore because it has become very outdated. So we are in the middle of a rebranding, and that was part of it. We have done away with the acronym. Yeah, PFLAG, it's a wonderful organization. Like I said, it's national. We have, I can't remember the number, but hundreds of chapters all over the country and Canada and other places. And our primary purpose is to support parents and other loved ones of primarily LGBTQ youth. But, we definitely expand it out. If you're 60 and have a 40-year-old child that's come out as trans, you are certainly more than welcome. We never turn anybody away. And yeah, our particular chapter does a variety of activities and meetings and so forth to kind of just support one another, and to let parents know that they are not alone when their child comes out. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much for sharing, Dave.
I am also the father of a 19-year-old transgender male.
Yeah. And I was just going to share that I am a parent of a transgender child, and we've been on this journey for almost 8 years now. So and Dave and I met shortly after my son came out. So we, between the two of us, have a lot of experience here. And some of the topics we're going to cover this evening, so I'm going to talk a little bit about sex and gender, go over some terminology, language usage, and review some of the most frequently asked questions that we get from people, as well as go over some of the disparities that the LGBTQ community faces and how we can support them. And in this, also, we're going to kind of wrap around, if as a parent your child comes out, how you can best support them. And it may not be your child that comes out, it may be your child's friend that comes out, and how much your support even matters in that circumstance. So we have a bit to review. I'd like to start off, I just like to ask people, just in your head, like, how do you define biological sex and how do you define gender? Just think about that for a minute. And I'm going to, as a scientist, kind of start with the nitty gritty. I am going to start with biological sex. People think a couple different things. One of them is hormones and chromosomes. And typically we think of there's XX chromosomes for female, XY chromosomes for male. But if you've had a basic bio class, then you realize it's so much more complex than that. We could have XXX, XXY, a single X. It's just, and it goes on from there. I could spend a whole hour talking about this, but I'm not, don't worry. But to kind of sum it up, is sometimes with this complexity of hormones, sometimes internal and external sex organs may not match the sex chromosomes themselves. So somebody may have XY chromosomes, but may not have a penis, so it's very, very complex. Sometimes the internal sex organs may not match the external sex organs. And sometimes when a baby's born, the genitals may be ambiguous. And hormones can actually be delayed in expression, like the guaivadoces. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the guaivadoces. This translates to penis at 12. And there's a couple isolated populations in where babies that are assigned female at birth, once they hit puberty, all of a sudden a penis starts growing. And this is due to a blocked hormone pathway that around age 12 or around when puberty starts, the testosterone pathway is completed and a penis starts developing. And this is a delayed expression. So biological sex, simply put, isn't comprised of just male and female. It's very, very complex. And I wanted to take the opportunity to define the term intersex here. And that's a variety of conditions in which a person is born with reproductive or sexual anatomy that doesn't fit the typical description of male or female. And a very important takeaway here is not the same as being transgender. You may have an intersex person that's transgender, but they are not one and the same. Now, these sex hormones that I talked about and this complexity, they also play a role in the development of our brains. So a lot of people know, they'll say, oh, men and women think differently. And they do. Now, there's a lot of unfounded stereotypes, but they do. There's actually a difference in structure, size, and function between the male and female brain. So a difference in gray and white matter. Now, when these changes take place, it's in utero, and they call it either masculinization or feminization of the brain. Sometimes these don't align with the outward sexual characteristics of the baby. Now, these are irreversible developments in the brain, but at the end of the day, they're just natural variations. And so, having talked about like a masculinized or a feminized brain, kind of want to tie in gender identity here. Gender identity, this is our internal awareness and understanding of our own gender. And it's likely set when brain sex is set. So that masculinization and feminization of the brain takes place in the late second, early third trimester. And that's likely when gender identity is set. And it actually establishes itself between 18 to 36 months. It's an involuntary biological response. It's just who we are. It can also be delayed in expression. And I think a very, very important takeaway here is that gender identity is not binary. It's a spectrum, and it's not necessarily linear either. And we'll talk a little more about that. So a little more on gender. So we have gender roles. This is a societal construct. This, varies from one society to the next. It varies over time. And this is just society telling people how they should behave in their specific gender role. Gender expression, this is how we dress or how we present ourselves. So just using myself as an example here. There are some days my gender expression is really feminine. I like all the bling. There's in the summertime when it's hot, just give me a unisex t-shirts and khaki shorts, and it's a more masculine gender expression. It has nothing to do with my sexual orientation, my gender identity. It's just how I feel comfortable dressing at a particular time. So gender expression isn't the same as gender identity, and it's not the same as sexual orientation. These are three different topics. Now, I am going to talk a little bit about transgender people, and when I do, I'm referring to a person whose sex assigned at birth does not match their gender identity. And I'm going to be using it as an umbrella term to include non-binary folks, gender fluid folks, agender under this umbrella. Now, important takeaway on this slide is being transgender is not a mental health disorder or a disability. It's just a natural biological variation. So some terminology. If we're going to talk about a subject or we're going to talk to our kids, we need to know the language. So just a review of the terminology. I already defined transgender. Do want to point out, when somebody refers to a transgender male, they're talking about somebody who was assigned female at birth and who is a transgender male or whose gender identity is masculine. A transgender female is somebody who was assigned male at birth but identifies as female. Now, it's really important when you use the word transgender, use it as an adjective, not a noun. So you would say she is transgender or she's a transgender person. Never say she's transgendered or she is a transgender. Those can be very, very offensive. So keep that in mind. Now, when I refer to somebody who's cisgender, I'm referring to a person whose sex assigned at birth matches their gender identity. Most folks are cisgender. Now, non-binary, I mentioned this, is just an umbrella term for people whose gender does not fit into that male-female gender binary. So non-binary forms have actually existed for thousands of years in many different cultures. It's nothing new under the sun. Non-binary folks can prefer a range of pronouns, including he, him, she, her, they, them, and others. So, and the term agender, I refer to that. And that's just somebody who doesn't identify as male or female. Now, if you're reading things, you may come across, or you may hear people talk about assigned female at birth, which would be AFAB, or assigned male at birth, AMAB, especially if you're reading medical articles. And it just refers to the biological sex that was assigned by the doctor right after birth. Misgendering, this is so important. This refers to when someone calls a transgender person by the wrong pronouns, the wrong name, or they use the wrong gendered language, like waiter, waitress, son, daughter, along those lines. Now, it may not seem like a really big deal for cisgender people, but being misgendered can be really distressing. And in some cases, it can even be dangerous to trans people, depending on the circumstances. And I'll talk a little more about that. Excuse me. You may hear the term passing or to pass, and this just refers to when a trans person is perceived as their true gender and is no longer misgendered. Now, some trans folks, they don't care whether they pass or not, but for others, it's an important step to alleviating their gender dysphoria. In gender dysphoria, this is a condition in which someone feels distress about or a severe disconnect between their sex and gender, and people often transition to alleviate this distress. Now, not all transgender people have gender dysphoria, and that just kind of boils down to being trans isn't a disorder or disease. It's just a natural variation on the human experience, and I can't stress that enough. So LGBTQIA+, most folks know the definitions of lesbian, gay, bisexual. I just define transgender and intersex. The Q is an umbrella term for sexual and gender minorities who are not heterosexual or cisgender. And this is a term that the older folks within the LGBTQ population may find a little offensive. The youth have really embraced this term, so you'll probably hear it a lot. Now, the A can be asexual, which these are just folks that don't experience any sexual attraction, or ally, a person who gives help or support to another person or group. So somebody who is supportive of the LGBTQI population. Another term I threw in here because a lot of parents ask me during presentations is the term pansexual. And this just refers to when there's a romantic or sexual attraction to a person, regardless of their sex or gender identity. Now, I want to review a little language usage. And I want to start off with pronouns, because using a person's pronouns is really imperative, because using the wrong pronouns can increase dysphoria. When dysphoria increases, this can increase depression, anxiety, suicidality, can actually lead to suicide. So it's very, very important to use the correct pronouns. Using the wrong pronouns can also out a transgender person. And this can have a lot of different consequences depending on the situation. If it's at work, it can result in the loss of their job. At school, it could result in verbal, physical harassment, even murder. So it is so important, if you know somebody's transgender, not to share that information with people they have not shared it with. That's known as outing. So using the correct pronouns can actually save a person's life. And I mean, it's just that important. So gendered language, the English language is really gendered. So I find that I have to be very thoughtful about my speech. So we talked about how important pronouns are, but there's other language, other language we use, we have to think about, like son or daughter, wife, husband. So, the rule of thumb is just use gendered language that a person tells you to use. So what they are comfortable with. Now, every trans person is different, so we can't make a generalization on account of what other people have preferred. Certain terms are found offensive by some trans folks, but others strongly identify with them, like the word transsexual. The older population may embrace this term. The younger trans population does not. They're very offended by it. So my point of view, I don't use it. Simple as that. And the FTM and MTF, this stands for female to male or male to female. And these also have become very offensive to certain people. So these are terms that I avoid using. And I always just use an individual's preference as my guide as to what terminology to use. That's the best way to go about it. And I already talked about outing, not mentioning or implying an individual's transgender status unless they explicitly give you permission. So, like if I'm going out to lunch with a bunch of friends and I want to bring along a friend who happens to be a transgender woman, I would not tell the other group that I'm meeting up with, oh, hey, I'm bringing a friend who's trans. I would just say, hey, I'm bringing a friend along. You don't need to let other people know that don't need to know. It's simple as that. So pronouns. A lot of people are like, what if I don't know somebody's pronouns? Just ask. I found myself in this situation and I was like very nervous about asking somebody their pronouns. And I found that nobody's offended. I have never found anybody offended when I ask them. So if you're not sure, just ask. Share your own pronouns and ask what theirs are. And what if you want to be supportive, but you make a mistake? Who's been on this journey and you've called your child one name and used certain pronouns for so many years, no matter how supportive you are, you're gonna screw up at first till you just get in that habit and you get it changed. It's so you're gonna make mistakes, but that, if you're supportive, just correct yourself, apologize, and move on. Don't dwell on it. Just say, oh, I'm sorry, and move on. And now, what if you're talking about somebody and they're not around? Always use their current pronouns. And like if I'm talking about my son before he transitioned, I still use male pronouns. I do not use female pronouns. So you want to use their current name and pronouns. You don't want to use their birth name or dead name or their previous pronouns. So now I'm going to review some frequently asked questions. So what does it mean to be trans? So transitioning is the process by which a transgender individual changes their gender expression. This is very different for each individual. Nobody's journey is the same. Some trans folks experience very little outward change. Others may change their clothing or their hairstyle, their name and their pronouns. They may undergo hormone treatment or have surgery, but not every trans person goes through each one of these steps. It's very different for each person. And the rate at which somebody transitions is also really individual. So a lot of parents ask me, when does a trans person know they're trans? This is also varies from individual to individual. Now, we already talked about gender identity expressing itself between 18 to 36 months. So yes, gender diversity can become apparent in children as young as 2. Others have a delayed expression, and we talked about that, where they become aware of their gender incongruity when they're starting puberty. And other trans folks may not start transitioning until adulthood. But overall, most trans individuals have to build up the courage to express their identity and communicate their feelings to their friends and family. And this is not something that just tends to happen overnight. A lot of times they have an internal struggle and have to build up the courage over months, sometimes years, before they can share their journey with their friends and their family. And a lot of parents want to know, oh, is this just a phase? This is just a phase. But there have been some recent studies which are really compelling, and less than 4%. One study actually shows less than 0.5%, but let's just say less than 4% of trans folks have reported as detransitioning. And of those 4%, they don't necessarily regret transitioning, but they may have to for social or economic reasons. There's an incredible long-term study, and a very substantial long-term study at that showed less than 2% of trans folks that have undergone gender-affirming surgery expressed any regret. And overall, the medical professionals currently believe that if a child is insistent, persistent, and consistent with their gender identity, that identity is unlikely to shift. And so typically adolescents and adults whose identities persist for greater than 6 months, their identities are unlikely to shift. And that's not from the time they come out to us. That's from the time they start, working on it themselves internally, not when they tell us. Because as a parent, like when my son came out, it seemed so sudden to me. What I didn't know at the time is he had been struggling with this for 2 years before he had the courage to talk to us. And that's a substantial amount of time. And I wished we had known sooner, but we didn't. And it even seemed like so sudden to us, but it wasn't sudden to him. Something that everybody needs to know is the risk for depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, and suicide are much higher in individuals who are unable to live openly in their affirmed gender. And this is the same for those LGBTQ or LGBTQIA folks also, not just trans folks. But the great news is that folks supported in their gender identity experience a significant decrease in mental health disparities. With parental support, these disparities can be decreased to that of almost to that of the general population. It's that significant. Parental support is so important, and it truly, truly saves lives. So, a lot of people are asking, well, how prevalent is, being trans? And a lot of people are citing 1.8% that came from a 2017 study. But a lot of medical professionals were questioning this number. And one in particular, Dr. Casey Kidd, she looked at the studies and she's like, they're not asking all the right questions here. They're just asking male, female, transgender. So she did a much more comprehensive survey, which is fantastic, right here in our own backyard, Pittsburgh Public Schools. And the results, though surprising to some, were not at all surprising to those in the medical community. And they found that 9.2% of students identified as gender diverse. About 30% identified as masculine, about 39% as feminine, 31.3% as non-binary, and 13.1% selected more than one. And these students could be questioning or gender fluid or one of the above. And a slightly higher percentage of students of color identify as gender diverse than white students. And Dr. Kidd also repeated this study in rural West Virginia. So not a city school, but rural, and found very similar statistics. So hopefully this will be taken to a national level. And I think it's also, it may be kind of depressing, but I think it's very important to talk about disparities. Let's start with mental health. trans folks have reported suicidal ideation, 86.3% of the population. And 41% of the trans population have attempted suicide. Those are really significant numbers. And, this is why it's so important that, if your child is questioning, that you have some talks and they know that you support them. And I'm going to talk a little more about that. 65% of students felt unsafe at school. 53% missed school due to physical harassment. We're not talking just verbal bullying. We're talking physical harassment, 53%. And then homelessness and employment discrimination go hand in hand at 30%. And trans folks have reported harassment or mistreatment on the job of up to 80%. And 33% have suffered healthcare discrimination. And when I have here refused treatment or harassed by a doctor, I'm not talking about a trans person going to a primary care doctor, let's say, and wanting hormones and the doctor saying, oh no, I don't prescribe hormones. This is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about somebody who goes to the doctor with a laceration and goes to the ER and they're turned away because they're trans, or they're not treated properly because they're trans. It's very significant and it's very frightening. And these disparities that I talked about are increased for disabled trans people, whether they are physically disabled or they're neurodivergent. And there's also significantly increased for transgender Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, most especially transgender women of color. So greater disparities across the board for these two particular groups. In 2022, there were 37 victims of fatal violence in the US that we know of. 81% were people of color, 59% were Black, and 81% were transgender women. Oh. Now, knowing this, how can we support the transgender community? So what does being an ally look like? Somebody who can support another group. And it can be simple. Add your pronouns to your Zoom name. That's the first thing I did when I logged on here. My email signature has my pronouns. I'm just trying to normalize so somebody doesn't feel awkward if they're including their pronouns in their correspondence. So just normalize the usage of pronouns when you introduce yourself and when you're emailing somebody. You can do little things like I have a rainbow or trans flag sticker when I was teaching at Duquesne on my binders. When I went to class, I had little trans and rainbow hearts. And that way the students knew I was a safe person to talk to. We already said never out an LGBTQ person. That's important. And always respect somebody who's fully out by using their name and pronouns even when they're not around. Speak up when you hear misinformation or inappropriate talk or jokes among friends, family, coworkers. If you have a friend or a relative whose child comes out, offer them support. It is, when your child comes out, a lot of times you feel as a parent, you feel very isolated and alone. And to just take that step and let them know they're not alone, that means it really just makes a huge difference. So what if it's your child that comes out? The first thing, even if you don't have your head wrapped around it, just let them know that they have your unconditional love and support. And then educate yourself on terminology, the available resources, and follow your child's lead. As parents, we tend to think we know our kids better than, they know themselves. But when it comes to their sexual orientation and gender identity, trust me, they know themselves better than we know them. So follow your child's lead. Connect with other parents. That's so important. Make sure that they receive appropriate medical and mental health care. For example, if you do have a transgender child or a child that comes out as gender diverse, make sure that you go to a gender care specialist and that their mental health care is by somebody who is very experienced in working with gender diverse children. And realize that sometimes as a parent, you have to be their voice and advocate for them as they navigate this journey. I know for many years for my son, I needed to be the one, and with his permission, sometimes I had to speak louder in some areas than others, and I was his voice when he didn't have his voice, and now he's found his voice, so to speak, and can advocate for himself. But as a parent, sometimes you have to be the one to advocate for your child, and be their safe space, and just know you're not alone, and let them know they're not alone. So all of the disparities I talked about, these can be really scary as a parent, as a foster parent, but be aware that with at least one supportive adult in their life, so even if it's your child's friend and you're not their parent, one supportive adult in their life, this reduces an LGBTQ child chance of suicide by 40%. So you really do make a difference, and you can save a life simply by supporting this child and being a safe adult in their life. This is something that I'm not going to go over just because I want time for the panel to speak, but Google this, the gender unicorn. This is a great tool to use to speak to a child of any age about gender and/or sexual orientation. Google it. It's awesome. And I want to leave this up for people that are checking this out on YouTube. Here's some local resources. PFLAG Pittsburgh. We have all kind of support groups. They're fantastic. Parent to Parent, that is just parents of transgender children support group that I run. Trans Uniting is specific to Black transgender youth. Pittsburgh Adolescent Center has some fantastic resources on their website. And Hugh Lane Wellness Foundation has a lot of great family resources. And then on the national level, Gender Spectrum and the Trevor Project are two great places to check out. And with that, I want to introduce our panelists, and let me stop sharing here. Sorry about that. And I'm going to start off with Dave West, who is another parent. Dave, his pronouns are he, him, his. If you just take it from here, introduce yourself, and then you can pass it on to Marshall, and then Marshall can then pass it on to Talia. So Dave, if you will.
I'm David West. As I said before, I'm the father of a 19-year-old son who's transgender. I am also the president of local Pittsburgh chapter of PFLAG. My son came out when he was 13. He's now 19, so it's been 6 years. As Johanna said, with many trans kids, when he hit puberty, that's when the body dysphoria began, and he had, much like Johanna's son, spent 2 years dealing with this and researching it and struggling with it, and then he finally did such an amazingly brave thing and came out to us. And since then, we of course told him we love him and so forth, but we had no idea what he was talking about. And so we went to PFLAG Pittsburgh, which was an immense help, and other resources, both online and in person. And I am 100% certain if Kevin had not come out when he was 13, he would not still be here. I am absolutely positive of that. The road he was on with his depression did not have a good ending. And since he came out, he's struggled. But one thing that I noticed fairly quickly after he came out was that I had my child back. I had been losing my child to their depression for a few years without realizing it because it's so gradual. And then they came back after Kevin came out. And yeah, it's I also I'm a teacher and I sponsor the GSA, the Gender and Sexuality Alliance, at our high school in our district and the middle school that I teach at. And I can attest that the students who come to me with parental support and the students who come to me without parental support are in very, very different places, emotionally and mentally and psychologically and physically. It's parental support is the magic bullet on this. It's I am 1000% certain my son is going to have a wonderful, successful, happy life. And it's because it's 90% because of him, but we'll take some of the credit for supporting him and helping him and making sure he knows that he is safe and that we will always have his back no matter what. I'll step down on my soapbox and Marsha, I'll let you take it.
I loved your story. And do I just start off? I'm all good to go? Okay.
Yeah.
My name is Marshall. I use he, they, they pronouns. I'm trans, masculine, non-binary. I'm 19 and I graduated high school last year. So now I'm just working and everything. I'm estranged from my mom and my dad. My dad was absent most of my life. My mom was a single parent and she was already abusive growing up. And when I came out at I didn't come out, she discovered I was outed by my phone that I was using like trans that I identified as trans and I use he him and stuff like that at school. I had friends who I like texted who I used like my chosen name with and everything. My mom found out. It was like living double lives for so long, for like almost 2 years in high school. And then sophomore year, my mom found out and I got kicked out of the house. I got like the next day I had to pack up and leave and never want to hear from me again, kind of thing. I felt guilty from like I felt guilty from being kicked out, so I went back home, to make her feel better because she kind of made me feel bad for actually leaving, which is so weird. But I lived at home for like another year, and then at 16 I left again because I realized that my depression was taking over, and two types of depression of like having an abusive household and also the depression of being trans and not being able to like identify how you want. And the constant double life thing was just draining. And like it was my senior year. I'm just like, I just want to graduate. I just want to like get over with all this and just be happy. But my transition has been pretty smooth so far. But it does feel really nice to have support. I don't really have familial support with being trans. Most of my family's transphobic or homophobic and don't really understand anything about queerness or about Black queerness. There's another like thing that goes along with it, and it can be pretty lonely. I only have my partner and I have Johanna and some other people as support, like a handful of people, but no family. And my parents especially, I wish I had them in my life to be, say like, we're so proud of you for doing this, or like to be there while I'm getting my hormone injections, or being there to hold my hand, like to just encourage me to keep going and things like that. So that's been pretty hard, but I'm still pushing. I'm still doing a great job with my journey and everything. I'm pretty excited for what's to come because I am like my first year officially transitioning and I'm pretty proud of myself. But like I said, it would be really nice to have like your mom or your dad there, or like even an aunt or something there to just tell you like you're doing great, or a sister. I'm just kind of like alone in this, and it can be pretty depressing. It's emotionally taxing at times too, because you realize that you don't have anybody to tell you you're doing a good job, or to be there for you in your your worst moments of being trans, because most things I experience are from work, or transphobia from work, or from like people on the street who don't know that you're trans, just don't know the term, like that don't have the education to treat you better as a person because you are trans. So I'm always stuck with like dealing with that alone and crying about it at night because I'm so sick of dealing with it and not having someone to confide in about it besides my partner. But besides that, that's the main thing that I feel like why parents should be, or family in general should be there for their trans kids, because it's really hard going through it alone. And no kid, no matter if you're 19, 12, 9, going through it, you should never have to go through it alone. And you should never have to feel that burden of like making so many changes to your body and not having someone to tell you like you look great all the time, or you're doing awesome, or you should keep going and things like that, because it can be really hard. And as Johanna said, detransitioning is usually a result of that, of doing it alone and feeling so just like you don't have anybody there for you while you're doing all this stuff. But that's all from me. Who's our next person, Johanna?
Talia texted me. She's having technical difficulties, so I think we lost her off of this presentation, unfortunately. But Marshall, I do want to say I'm proud of you, and you look fantastic, and you're doing a great job, and I love you. So just needed to get that out there. On
Thank
that
you.
note, we're going to open up for questions. This is your chance to ask us any questions you may have. We're here, so please.
I'll ask a question because I always have lots of questions, but if anyone else has anything, you can certainly put it in the chat, or you can jump on in and ask as well. But I want to say first, Marshall, I think you're incredibly brave, and the way you have advocated for yourself in doing a really hard thing. Leaving is hard. It's hard even, with the organization we work with kids that are in really challenging homes. And even with that, it's so hard to leave, right? And so your insight into what you needed at such a young age is really brave, and it's really wise. And so I think you should be really, really proud of yourself. I think that's amazing. And talking about it the way you are is going to help a lot of other kids coming up behind you. So keep being you and shining your light in that way, because it's really amazing. But my question is actually for you. We, as an organization at Every Child, we're obviously a foster care organization. So we have foster parents, but we also have a school-based program. We have professionals who are working with kids of all ages in the home and in all different kinds of homes. And so my question would be, what could someone who is maybe not a caregiver, not a family member for you, that you would have encountered, whether in high school or in other, going about your life, what can we as supportive adults who want to make sure that you are seen and heard and aren't feeling so alone, what can we do? Or what are there things or roles that you thought, wow, I just wish this teacher or this therapist would have been able to see or do X, and that would have made my day a little easier, my life a little bit easier. Do you have any advice along those lines?
Yes, I do. So one of the things I want to do for my career to help other people is to become like a guidance counselor for Black queer folks, because that's something I wish I had now, as like a mentor, someone to like say, you're doing great, this is normal, this is to kind of walk you through, because I don't have a mom to say this is normal. I don't have a dad to say this is normal. So for like gendered things that happened to me through my transition, or things that happened to me prior to my transition, like I never had a role model to look to, and I want that to be something that that can be there for more kids like me who need a role model, who just need to know that like they're in the right direction, they're doing a great job, and that to keep them motivated, you know what I mean, emotionally and physically and everything.
Yeah, that's great. And it also always a good reminder that it's just, when we talk about diversity and equity in all positions, that's why it's important, right? Representation and seeing someone, if you see it, you can be it and you can get there. And we need to do better about making sure that we have those examples and that we're actively being inclusive. So I think that's really, really helpful.
Can I jump in for just 1 second?
Yeah.
Just from my experience working with youth, normalizing who they are is also very important. Not making it a thing, seeing who they are besides being trans, and just normalizing them as a human being and not as a transgender human being.
Yeah, that's a really great point, David. And my next question is really for David and Johanna. In this environment, I guess it kind of speaks a little bit to your point too, David. It feels so urgent to protect trans kids, and really anyone divergent, but in particular right now, it feels really unsafe for trans youth. And so how, as parents, do you navigate sort of really wanting to protect them and kind of coach them through, it seems like we're being inundated every day with something new that's just ridiculous and really cruel. It's a cruelty that can be really crushing. And so I guess my question is, how do you navigate that as a parent? And then also, David, to your point, celebrate and recognize that your child may be transgender, but that's not all they are. They're also maybe an artist or a musician, or they have aspirations outside of their their gender identity. And you also want to create space so that it's so that can flourish as well. So how do you as parents navigate that?
As far as the safety issue, and this is my personal situation, Kevin passes as male, which helps obviously alleviate, fears of him being singled out. But he has, of course, every job he's had, eventually people have figured it out, or he's just simply told them. He's not ashamed of it at all. And he's never been fired, but he's been put in positions where he had to quit. I have made the conscious decision, which is difficult to maintain, to not live in fear and to not cause him to live in fear. One example I'll give you: he and some friends last summer after he graduated from high school, they rented a cabin. I can't remember where it was, but it was in the middle of the state, the big red T. They were right in the middle of it. And I was terrified. I spent the entire weekend waiting for a phone call from him, or God forbid, the police. He never knew that. He probably knew it, but he never saw me express it. I let him borrow my car, which looks like a pride parade, threw up all over the back with all the stickers I have. And I prayed and I waited, but I would not detract from his enjoyment of his senior trip to this cabin by really even discussing. He knows to be careful. He knows not to be stupid. But he also will stand up for himself. I've seen him do that. He is, and to the point I think you said about Marshall, and I agree 100%. Every transgender child I have known, and my son in particular, are so brave. Kevin is the bravest person I've ever known in my life. So he can take care of himself, but yeah, it's there. It's just simply there. And you're absolutely right. It's so much more prevalent right now. But I also very strongly believe that genie got out of the bottle quite a while ago, and they're not going to get it back in. So I think what we're experiencing right now, and by we I mean our transgender loved ones, is temporary. It will stop, but we have to get through it first. But society, I mean, every poll or survey or whatever, society is most of the people in our society are supportive of transgender individuals. Just unfortunately, the ones who aren't won't shut up. But I don't know if that answers your question, because my situation is not, I guess, the norm, because my son does pass, and I have no doubt if he needed to, he could take care of himself in a fight. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. I kind of rambled there.
No, I think that's really helpful. Johanna, do you?
I think it's my son. We're also blessed. My son passes, but there's a difference between when he was 16 and now that he's 21, 22. I'm losing track. It's balancing the fear, and the fear eases as you go along a little bit, but it doesn't ever totally go away. But like having these conversations with your child on how to be safe, so that when they go out, they know buddy system, and, just educating them on how to be safe when they're younger, and hopefully that will apply when they get older. But I can tell you the fear for me it has lessened a great deal, but it hasn't gone away. And especially in today's climate. And I think that's why I do what I do, because I think the more educated people are and they realize these are just kids. It just boils down to these are just kids. And there is so much misinformation being spread, so much fear being instilled in people when there is no need. And so, and I think my fear motivates me to do what I do and to educate as many people as possible, and to have open conversations with my kid about, now that he's older, it's like places he wants to travel. And I'm like, well, you have to think, and you have to see, when he was in college, he was looking at like Kazakhstan or someplace.
wow.
And I'm like, the stands tend to not be LGBTQ friendly. Let's take a close look at what happens if they know. And, so just kind of taking a step back and taking a look at the safety of certain situations. But, he graduated college and he got a job. We were excited. We took a vacation right afterwards to celebrate. He called the employment agency that he got the job through, and it was for a research engineering position. And they're like, oh, well, and he's like, when do I start? Where do I go? Yada yada yada. And they said, well, I'll check all the details, get back to you, and you'll be set to go. And the company had rescinded the offer. Now, it being a research position, they probably did a very, very detailed background check and probably came up with his birth name somewhere along the way and realized he was trans, because the employment agency was floored. This had never happened to them. They've never had anybody rescind. Their only excuse was, oh, we had somebody who could start a week earlier.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
And that was just the thinnest of excuses. And so we could think of nothing else other than, well, they know I'm trans and they just didn't want me there, which turned out for the better. He's making less money, but he's substantially happier working for, a nonprofit LGBTQ organization doing SOGI training. So in the end, it worked out fine. But just knowing that as much as we tried to cover our tracks and as much as he passes, that people, if they want to know, they can still find out. And now he's front and center, so people are going to know no matter what. And he doesn't have to worry so much about if he passes or not. But that was a kind of an eye-opening experience there. So yeah.
We had a question in the chat about any advice for talking with family members who aren't accepting, and I'm sure that also runs on a spectrum, right? Because there's education that can happen and hopefully will help. But do you have advice on either how you all navigated that, or how you advised your children to navigate that? Kind of when do you cut people out completely, and when do you maybe keep communication open? How do you do that?
Yeah, I think Dave and I both have some experience with this. We had a lot of family members that were not supportive when my son came out, either of us or of him. And almost 8 years down the road, they still aren't, and we don't talk to them. Now, close family members, it comes down to education. And I think, like with the grandparents, with aunts, uncles, and that's like I do like some trans 101s that are open to family members to kind of come in. I think seeing if they're willing to educate themselves a little bit is the biggest stepping stone. Because when they put a face to that concept, when it's their own family, a lot of times, no matter how trans or homophobic they are, a lot of times they will be like, okay, I love my niece, nephew, grandchild. I will try and learn a little bit more. That is like the first step. And like with my mother, she at first was like, well, this is my only granddaughter. I can't use he, him pronouns. I can't call them by their name. And I'm like, and I explained to her, and once she understood, I said, Mom, when you use his birth name and female pronouns, you're hurting him. You're increasing his depression, his dysphoria, his chance of killing himself. You could literally be the cause of his death. I said, do you love your grandchild? Do you want to be in their life? You will respect this and respect their life. If not, I'm afraid that you're not going to be able to see them anymore because you're going to hurt them. And that made her stop. And she's like, well, I love him. And she said him. And she's like, I love my grandchild. And and it took her a while to wrap her head around it. But she's like, I will try. And she did. And it was just having that hard conversation. And that conversation with some more distant relatives didn't go so well. And so, and I always asked my child too, like I followed their lead. Do you want me to tell so-and-so? Do you want me to tell so-and-so? So-and-so does not accept this. Do you want to be around them? No? Okay, then we'll never be around them. So following their lead and their comfort level is what I did. And I'll turn it over to Dave.
Well, you actually touched on the one thing I really want to emphasize so extremely strongly is to follow your child's lead. Kevin, we did not out him to anybody, and we did not tell anyone until he told us to. The one exception to that, he came out at our church, and driving home, I said, so you're coming out at school? He said, no. And I said, well, you just did, because I mean, the church is right in the middle of our school district, you know. So I said, you're going to have to address that fact. You have come out at school, just you did it through the back door of doing it at church. So yeah, we completely follow his lead. And the other thing I would add is boundaries. We very gently, I think we phrased something along the lines of, we expect everyone in Kevin's life to respect and love him. And if you are unable to do that at this time, we will welcome you back into our lives when you are able to do so. So a little passive aggressive, I guess, but we didn't want to say, if you don't support our son, you're out of here. We wanted to give people the opportunity to do what we did and learn and be educated. And we offered all the education we could give everybody, but we were quite clear that there is a boundary here now that was not here until we spoke to you, but it's there now, and you will respect it, or you're out of here, and we were fortunate. We did not openly lose family members. There are aunts and uncles of mine that have become distant since he came out, and gradually, or not so gradually, but no one, and even those people that I think don't accept it refer to my son by his name and his pronouns. So yeah, those are the two big things: is follow the lead of the child and make sure those boundaries, and stick to them. Your child has to know that you mean it, and you will follow through on that. When we told my now ex-wife's father, he's ex-military, and we were ready to have him no longer be in our lives. She was as well. And our son knew that. He knew when we made that. And it's actually interesting. It turned out he was one of the more supportive people. We found out years later, after we told him, he was calling Kevin late at night to check on him and see how he was doing, which is, oh my God, someone we thought might tell us to go jump off a cliff was actually one of the more supportive people. But yeah, those are the two things I would say, but especially you have to follow your child's lead. You absolutely have to, you know, don't let family politics or real politics or religion, don't let any of that dictate the path. It has to be based on your child's needs.
Yeah.
Can I also add to that?
Yes, please.
So a few things that you guys like opened my mind to some things I forgot about actually. With my mom, when I first came out, or like I said, when I was outed through my phone, because she was a phone searcher back then, and it was always like, you know, if it seems suspicious, give me your phone. So that was a constant thing, and that was the biggest fear of mine, because all of my transition stuff was in there, all of my like, I don't know, I had like I said, my friend used my chosen name, and no one used she her for me. Nobody used she her for me. At school, nobody knew what gender actually was. They just knew, you know, they don't use their birth name, they use this name, and this is what we refer to. But my mom, she said, what's our community gonna think of us? Like whenever I came out, because she did try like for a day or two, she tried to like understand, and she tried to like get it, but then she went back to the abusive nature, and it's like, no, this is not who I raised and everything, and we're Christians, so it was just bad. But she did look on Facebook, watching videos, trying to figure it out, trying to like ask questions, and it made me feel really good when a parent shows engagement in their child's decision, because like Johanna said, it's not overnight like, oh, I'm trans. It's a thing we think about for months, for years at a time. Finally have the words to describe it, finally have the courage to talk about it, and we want to open up people we care about, hoping they'll accept us. And I just wish most parents knew that it wasn't just a, you know, you blink in it, this is who, like, or even social media is influencing you. No, this is just who maybe social media helped me figure out who I was, kind of thing. The other thing was, so the first thing was like the community is always thought of like how will our family think about us and everything like that. The second thing was with boundaries. The time I tried to reach out to my mom again, we went 3 years no contact because I just realized she was too toxic for me. In December of 2022, I reached out to her again, trying to reconnect and everything. And I was like, hey, I said, I'm trans, you know, I look and sound like masculine now. I'm not going back. This is who I am now. I hope you can accept me for who I am. And I took her to one of my appointments for my hormones. And while in the doctor's office, she was like, oh yeah, you know, I think I can understand this. I think I can get on board with it. But then like the next day, sent me a long paragraph saying that she could not love me this way. And I thought love was unconditional from parents, but for her, it's like either you change back or I'm not going to love you anymore. And no child who is trying to find themselves needs to hear that. Out of all the things, I know it's not funny. It's just crazy that was like something. The first thing that my mom thought to say to me was like, "I can't love you if you're this person." And no child needs to know that, like, things like to have that told to them, you know, by their parent. I think all parents should try, even if it's not confusing at first, try to listen to your kid, because 9 times out of 10, the kid knows what they're talking about. They know exactly what they're describing to you. They're telling you dysphoria that they're dealing with. They're not lying to you. They're not trying to get attention. Something that they feel deeply about. They should be respected.
Yeah, that's really, thank you for sharing that. I have one other question. I'm sure I have a lot, but I want to be mindful of our time too. But one of the things that I just sort of have really seen, it's, you know, in media, in discussion around, and I should say in unnuanced and sort of the unhelpful conversations around trans individuals, is there seems to be this general feeling like they're not entitled to body autonomy, right? That because they have because they are transgender, people are somehow entitled to information about really personal things, whether it's healthcare or when they say they're transitioning, what does that really mean? So I guess as parents, and then also Marshall, since you've been through this with your mom, how do you address that? How do you set boundaries for privacy and for because it's something that it bothers me when you hear that discussion, when celebrities have come out as being transgender, and then right away there are really inappropriate questions and et cetera on really personal issues. So how do you set those boundaries and view that?
That is such a good question, because when my child came out, they were 14, just about ready to turn 15. I don't know how many people said, oh, does that mean they're getting all of the surgeries? You know, are you gonna let them start on all this right away and get all the surgeries? And I'm like, first off, they're 15. This is a step-by-step thing. Second off, do I ask you about your child's genitals?
Yeah.
And that's it. And they're like, oh. I'm like, no, we don't go there. And you know, when I hear people talking, it's just like, do you ask another coworker about their genitals? If you do, you shouldn't be. It's just when you ask about surgery, that's what you're asking about. And really, if there's any organization, any, you know, there's privacy when it comes to our medical issue, and that needs to be respected for trans people as well as anybody else. There should be absolutely no differentiation. That's my 2 cents, but yeah.
No, I agree with you, but it sure seems to be people need better educated on how you act in public, I feel. You know, Marcel, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yes, with my mom and with a friend, two like different examples to give for more clarity and everything. My mom, when she wanted to know more, this is the second time around when last year when she wanted to like reconnect and everything, and I was like, hey, so I'm trans and everything. I don't want the surgeries. Just going down the list to like let her know, because like that's one thing that I feel was cis het people who aren't educated on these things. They assume every single trans person is the same carbon copy, want the same things, want the same like appearance. Like no one knows that it's a spectrum. No one sees it as like a not it's an individual thing. It's not everybody's like a what's called monolith. It's not a monolith thing. And so I like to be open, like, hey, I don't want surgery. I like to talk about it because people want to know. Cis people are curious, you know, so I like talking about it. But I had a friend this year who last year who asked really invasive questions too. Where like, what was your dead name? Do you want this kind of surgery? Like just I guess it was more like uncomfortable and more invasive and just like I wouldn't even tell my partner this kind of thing. Like, you know, but I had to because we're dating. But like I wouldn't even but whenever you say no, they get so offended. And I don't know what it like they're entitled to like answers from you because you're the only trans person that they know. And that's so disgusting to me. And like you said with the genitals, it's always about genitals. Just ask me how my day is. Why does it have to be, oh, what's in between your pants? Or the fetishization that comes with having male friends as a trans guy and all these different aspects of boundaries. And like in therapy, I'm trying to learn boundaries with my childhood trauma, but also boundaries with being trans. And it's just like it helps to like have them go hand in hand sometimes. But it's just really sad how people don't see you as a person first. They see you as like the transgender is your noun. It's just before you as a person, it's what you are. And that's not fair.
Right.
Well, I keep coming back to, and I'm not trying to be funny about this, but if I ask just a random person about their child's genitals, I'd be labeled as a pedophile. I mean, you know, and so to think it's okay just because that child is trans to ask about their genital, no, that's no more appropriate than me asking the parents of a cisgender kid what's in their kid's pants. I mean, that's just, I can't understand. I truly can't, not just because I'm a trans kid. I don't understand even wondering what's in a child's pants. That's sick. It's simply sick, regardless of your reason for doing it, whether it's religious or whatever. Asking what's in a 12-year-old's pants is just sick. It's perverted. But that's I'm just
No, I agree. I think that's it's one of the reasons why I brought it up. I think it's really important that that those of us who want to be allies recognize that and also support that you know, that autonomy, and that when we're talking about individuals, no matter what, I mean, you wouldn't ask, as you pointed out, you wouldn't ask questions about anyone else, or if somebody had any, you know, anything on their body, you wouldn't feel comfortable asking. And that same sort of respect and courtesy does not seem to consistently be extended to this community. And so that's an area that I think we can all be advocates for as well. So
when I was at a social gathering, it was on New Year's Eve, and there were some people there that I was friends with, and they were asking questions, and you know, because they didn't know, and I was happy to answer the questions, but there were a few times where I said, I'm not going to answer that. That's not anything that's your concern. I said it very kindly, but again, I was
Sure.
trying to educate them. That's not okay.
Right.
Don't ask that question, you know. If I
Yeah.
answer the other questions they have, I just say, you know, it's not really appropriate for you to ask about my son's surgery. And so I'm not going to answer that. And I'm telling you,
Mhm.
you really can't ask somebody that, you know.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
it was an educational thing, but it's just yeah, I think for some reason people think, oh, trans
Yeah.
and it's in my experience, many people wanted to be educated. They weren't whatever.
Mhm. Mhm.
Still, you know, it's not a transgender person's responsibility to educate you about what being transgender is.
Right. That's what, as I've listened to all of you, certainly the two of you, and particularly Marshall talk, I just think, well, I really feel for you. It must be exhausting that you have to educate so many, that's such a big part of how you have to be in the world. And you should be able to just live your life, and your kids should be able to just live their life. But Marshall, I see your hand up. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to what David said. Mr. West, I'm sorry. I was gonna
Not
say
David's
that
fine.
I struggle with struggle. No, I was gonna say something else. So most of the thing I've noticed is I live in stealth with not being trans, like try to identify as a like cis het women, a woman, to avoid or like not even like I present that way, but kind of not correct people because I'm scared of being beat up or being harassed like at work or like just at getting at the pharmacy grab my medications, and I'm scared to say like, hey, actually I use he him, just because you just that you get a certain reaction, you get a certain like whether it's a look or like a sound or like what they say, and you don't know what to expect from people, so you don't want to be open about it, and that sucks. The whole boundary thing and the like you want to not get those questions, you decide not to be open about it, or you mask yourself, and that also sucks. So this adds to dysphoria and everything.
Yeah, that's a great point, Marshall.
Yeah,
Does
that
anyone? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think Dave and as well, we know that look that people get when when you say your child is trans, or my son would say, okay, no, this is my name. And it's just like, boom, their face changes and you got that look, and it makes you stop and consider your situation and assess your safety and whatnot.
Yeah. I know I've asked a lot of the questions. Do any of our guests have any other questions? Anyone who's dialed in? I know some folks might be driving and listening, so that's okay too. Okay. Well, Marshall, Johanna, David, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to be here. This was really, really incredibly insightful, and we really appreciate you being so generous with your time and sharing your expertise and experience and resources. For those who maybe came in a little bit late or want to go back and see what was discussed, this will be available on our YouTube channel. So please feel free to go back. You can share it with others who can benefit from this resource. But thank you all for being here. Special thanks to NAMI for supporting our Parent Up program. And look for another Parent Up. I think there's another one coming next month. Although off the top of my head, I can't remember the name of what the topic is. But keep an eye out on our social media. But thank you all so much for being here. Have a great evening.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.